thank you for joining us today. The Our Driving Concern Traffic Safety Program is pleased to be able to offer the Who's Driving Your Business and Are They Qualified webinar. I want to welcome our presenter this afternoon, Karen Puckett. Karen is the Director of Workplace Safety with the Texas Department of Insurance Division of Workers' Compensation. A few things to note before we get started. Everyone is muted, but you do have the ability to type questions into the chat function during the webinar. All slides will be made available. If you would like this presentation emailed to you, please submit your request in the comments section of the follow-up survey. The presenter may answer your question during the presentation or choose to address questions at the end. If you encounter any problems or issues, please type a message to let me know. The presenter and the Our Driving Concern Program Manager's contact information will be made available on the last slide. There is a very brief post-event survey at the conclusion of the webinar, and as this program is funded through grant dollars and provided at no cost to employers, we greatly would appreciate you giving us your feedback. With that, I welcome Karen, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to her to begin.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to present this information and thank the National Safety Council and Our Driving Concern for inviting me to do this. We're going to be talking today about driver qualifications and things that you might want to consider when you are hiring employees that you know are going to be driving for you. So we're going to cover, a little bit of background of why looking at transportation safety is important for employers, and talk about some of the standards that you might want to incorporate into your safety program for drivers. So background information, driving in Texas is really dangerous. There are a lot of people on our roadways, and this slide just shows how many people have died each year in crashes in Texas going back to 2010. So that's a lot of people. Every day somebody dies on our roadways. I've mentioned before that November 7th, 2000 was the last day nobody died in a crash on our roads. So if you've got employees out there driving, they're exposed to these dangers just like everybody else out on the road. I've shown this slide before, but I wanted to incorporate it again in case you haven't attended any of our previous webinars. But from an occupational safety standpoint, transportation incidents are the leading cause of work-related fatalities. 45% of people who died on the job in 2015 died in a transportation incident. And the majority of these people were not motor vehicle operators by occupation. So there's some concern about what kind of training and what kind of qualifications we're looking at for those people who drive as something that's secondary to their regular job duties. This is a breakdown by the major occupation sectors, just to show you how many people in each main category died in transportation incidents in 2015. And when you look at this and you see the transportation and material moving occupation group, 126 people died in that occupation group, which is obviously way more than any other occupation group. Of those 126, 19 were not motor vehicle operators. So 107 of those 126 were motor vehicle operators, and that's a common occupation, obviously, or a common job duty for those people. And the risk and exposure is really high for those because they are spending most of their workday on the road. But when you look at the other occupation groups and you add them together, they equal or actually exceed the number of deaths for transportation material moving occupations. So they may seem like small numbers individually when you look at the individual groups, but in total they do add up to just as many as within the transportation material moving occupations. Part of your occupational driving safety program and your policy should specify who's qualified to drive for you, for your business, and have policy statements related to those qualifications. Here are some things that you should consider when you're looking at who should be qualified to drive for you. And I'll talk a little bit more detail about these, you know, as we go through the presentation. But bottom line is, just because somebody has a driver's license does not necessarily mean that they are a safe driver. You definitely want it to be your policy that your employees have a valid driver's license, but just having a license may not be the only thing to consider when you're trying to decide who should be driving for you. Your policy should specify your qualifications for both commercial and non-commercial drivers. The Department of Transportation does regulate commercial motor vehicle drivers and what their qualifications should be, and different elements of maintaining that license. But you should really think about your non-commercial drivers as well when you're developing your policies. You should be performing motor vehicle record checks on employees, looking at those before you make a hiring decision to see what their history is in terms of their driving behavior. And you should look at it on a regular basis going forward after you hire an employee. You should consider putting a policy into place maybe that specifies the minimum, or I should say the maximum number of moving violations that you would consider to be meeting your standards for an employee. For example, you could have a policy that says your employees should not, or a frequent traveler cannot be convicted of 3 or more moving violations in a 3-year period, for example. So specify in your policy what your standards are, and when you do your motor vehicle record checks, if you see that employees are being, are getting convictions of moving violations outside of the workplace, that's an indicator of what their driving behavior is and should be a litmus for you to look at to say maybe this person should not be driving for us on the job. You should also have a policy that would dictate that employees should report to you when they get citations both on the job and off the job, just to notify the supervisor that occurred. That might be a trigger for you to go and check motor vehicle records outside of your normal process, but employees notifying you of that can be more real time than when you actually have to go out to the state to find their record. It's important to assess employees' driving skills. As I mentioned, just because they have a driver's license doesn't mean they're a good driver or know how to operate the vehicle that you need them to drive for you. These are some examples of ways that you can assess driver skills. You might want to do it, during the interview or pre-hire process. One example that I like to use is if you own a home health agency and you need to hire a nurse, when you are making your decisions about hiring, you're probably going to check to make sure that their nursing license is current, that they don't have any sanctions against them. You're probably going to talk to them about hazards that they might encounter performing healthcare duties, like bloodborne pathogen exposure, patient handling, those types of things. And then, but if you put them in a vehicle to drive most of their day going to visit patients, and you never talk to them or look at their driving record or talk to them about their driving skills or observe their driving skills, it's a big risk for them and your company and other people on the road. So these types of assessments can be really helpful in making those determinations. And you could look at in-vehicle monitoring systems. There are a lot of really sophisticated systems out there that can help you track, GPS and telemetry and hard braking and speeding and that sort of thing. Help show you where they are at any given point during the day, but also what their driving behaviors are. You could actually just do observation in the vehicle with them, or have the employee shadow with other drivers, especially with specialized motor vehicle operations. And if your resources are limited and you don't have staff available to do assessments, you could look at third-party evaluators. There are companies out there that will do driving assessments, on a contract basis as well. Another thing to think about, pardon me, is driver attitude. What are the tendencies of a person, and how does that affect their driving? Now, this particular photo just shows a car that maybe doesn't have a very healthy respect for fire hydrants, and the point that you're not supposed to park in front of them. And it looks like the fire department got what they needed, even though the car was in the way. So it's important to think about and talk to your employees about values and attitudes and behavior. Values are based on our beliefs and our morals and our philosophies individually, what we come to the table with when we, as employees, go to work for an employer. Attitude, is your feeling or your state of mind at any given time, and behavior are visible, observable actions. And so you might want to consider incorporating some behavior-related questions into your interview process to try to get an idea of what that employee or that candidate holds important to them and how that might affect their driving behavior. It's also important to consider whether or not an employee is well and fit to drive. You should incorporate into your job descriptions all of those job skills that are necessary to driving, like vision, hearing, reaction time, maneuvering, all the physical things and cognitive things that are important for driving, and make sure that your job descriptions cover those so it's clear when you're hiring people, these are the abilities that we're looking for. We want to make sure that people are capable of driving. And in our webinar last week, we talked about different things that can affect an employee's ability to drive, one being impairment. So, there might be some physical impairment that somebody has that could affect their driving. There could be an impairment that's related to substance, not necessarily abuse. It could be abuse, or it could be other substances like medications that they're taking and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that you're considering those things before you put somebody behind the wheel. And I just heard about a study that it was from 2012, but it was very interesting. It said that when somebody has to urinate really badly when they're driving, it causes cognitive deterioration similar to if you were to stay awake for 24 hours or having a blood alcohol content of 0.05. So, there are a lot of things that could affect somebody's driving and their ability to pay attention. And I thought that was a really interesting concept I hadn't thought about before. So when you're looking at impairment or things that could affect somebody's driving, try to look at it as a whole and not just the common things we think about, like, drinking or using drugs. You want your employees to be able to operate the vehicles effectively while they're driving for you. So if it's something outside of a normal, passenger vehicle, make sure that they're qualified to drive those types of vehicles, like forklifts, heavy equipment. They might have to have special certifications or training to be able to operate those. So make sure you're incorporating that into your policy and your procedures. The bottom line is, with all of this, is just to make sure that your employees meet your standards, that you set some standards for your place of business so that the people who are driving for you meet those standards, and you're doing your best to make sure that they're capable of performing that job task of driving. I've mentioned before, if you carry workers' compensation insurance, your insurance company is required to provide you with accident prevention services, so you can contact them to see if they can provide you with some resources to help you develop your plan and your policies. The Texas Department of Transportation has a lot of driving safety information on it, and our Driving Concern group also has lots of good training materials and information to help you. We do have information on our website, and let me get to that here. Bear with me. So when you come up on this main page, this is our main driving safety page, this roadway workplace link here, basically you start out here. And so you can look at driver policies and programs, but motor vehicle record checks, this explains some, why they're important, and we have some resources that you can click on. Here's where you go to the Department of Public Safety to request motor vehicle records. Here are some guides for assessing drivers and journey management. And as I've said before, you want to make sure that your policies have, are consistent with the local and state and federal regulations that exist when it comes to driving safety. At this point, I'd like to open it up for questions, or if anybody has any comments or challenges that you're facing when it comes to looking at driver qualifications and how to make those hiring decisions. So we have a question on here. It says, if your insurance company runs a motor vehicle record checks for you, do you also need to do that? So if you have a fleet and you have, your auto or liability insurance carrier will likely be running those for you as well. So if they're running them and providing them to you, then there's probably not a need for you to run them again, unless the period of time, in your policy is different from how frequently they're running it from an underwriting standpoint. And another question, is there a site to gain access to an applicant's driving record? So let me go back here and show you. We do have the link to that on our website. Here's the Texas Department of Public Safety motor vehicle record request, and you'll have to forgive me, my browser does not allow this website to work, but so you won't see this when you log on. It'll give you the access to how to request it. I apologize for that. But anyway, this is the link. It's the Texas Department of Public Safety. So if you just go to their website, they will, that's where you would request the motor vehicle record. And they do cost money. I think it's in the neighborhood of $25 or something like that to check, but it's a small price to pay to avoid, having somebody driving for you that may end up being in a crash, hurting themselves or a coworker or another party while they're on the job for you. Any other questions? I see we did have a request from Jody to send the presentation, and Katie will certainly do that. Any other questions? Oh, a good resource for driving skills assessment. Do I have a good resource? We are a state agency, so we don't endorse any particular company for driving assessment. So you could look online or talk to your workers' comp or your auto liability insurance company and see if they have any recommendations for companies that do driving assessments. If you're looking for, Jody, if you're looking for like checklists for how to assess a driver's skills and that sort of thing, there are things like that out there on the internet, and I can do a little bit of research and maybe provide that to Katie, some examples of, you know, driver assessment checklists that maybe you could use, if that would help. Any other questions? Well, here's my contact information. So if you have any questions down the road, please feel free to contact me, and we will try to help you out, you know, get you on the right path, or show you how to find things on our website if you're having difficulty navigating it. We have a lot of information out there, so sometimes it is hard to get through it all. Well, that concludes our webinar today. I appreciate everybody's time, and please be safe on the road out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for being with us today. We greatly appreciate the information that you shared with us. Hopefully this will help some employers keep their employees safer. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar. Have a great day. Remember, there are free resources available at txdrivingconcern.org, as well as a listing of other webinars coming up and trainings. Thank you and have a great day.